Right, so I'm going to talk about a very sad subject. It's an atrocity. It's the genocide of Christians in Africa, and particularly in Sudan and Nigeria. Now, I have done a segment before about the persecution of Christians in Africa and the relative, lack of care by the international community and especially the UN about 11 months ago. So if you want to have a look, just go and watch this. Today we're going to talk a bit about Sudan and then Nigeria. But what I want to say is that it seems to me that there are double standards with respect to the reporting of crimes committed according to some communities. And let me just be very clear. We constantly hear about, let's say, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, but we do not hear about Christianophobia. We do not have a specific UN day, for instance, that is given for and assigned for crimes against Christians. There is a day against Islamophobia. There is a day against anti-Semitism. There is a day against religious persecution and for religious freedoms, but there isn't a specific day again for commemoration, for instance, of the crimes against, not the commemoration, the condemnation of crimes against Christians. It's almost as if the focus is disproportionately on the anti-Semitism and Islamophobia side and not on the anti-Christian side. And here we have Hillel Neuer, who says massive protests in London, Paris, Amsterdam, Columbia University over new revelations that Sudan civil war last year caused 61,000 dead in Khartoum alone, many from starvation. And obviously it's empty spaces. Mm-hmm. And let me also just say that when it came to protests against the operation of the IDF in Gaza, there were many people who flew the Palestinian flags. Now we don't see them. This doesn't mean that crimes in Gaza don't continue to happen. They do. But the riots and the protests have stopped.
Yep.
I don't know. My speculation is that most probably these protests were funded by a side that was basically more anti-Jewish. It wasn't a pro-human rights side, because there continue to be crimes in Gaza, but we don't see these people. Right, and we do see here someone going to children in Sudan and explaining to them what happens in Gaza, which is, I think it's a bit weird. Let me just put it this way. He goes and he tells children in Sudan what's happening in Gaza. Now,
what does he expect the African children to do about it, even by his own standards?
Well, do you know, the important thing in this is what you don't notice, which is the camera. And he doesn't care whether they understand him or not. He cares about the fact that he is virtue signaling to the people who are going to watch it and are going to think that they are in his side. Right, so we have, sadly, some new developments in the Sudanese civil war, and one of the last ones, because they have massive instability since 1956. And right now, all these crimes are located, most of these crimes are located here in this area called Al-Fashir, which is in the southwest area where it's close to the Christian side of Sudan, because they're saying that basically the north is more Muslim majority and most of the Christians are in the south. Right, and let's see here what the Daily Mail has to say. Humanity at its worst. 2,000 civilians executed in the last 48 hours. This was published on November 1st. They're saying 460 massacred at a maternity hospital. Husbands forced to hear wives being raped for days. Horrifying accounts of how Sudan has descended into hell. And
I just want to point out that a lot of people in the current government were calling for opening the door to migration from Sudan. and to providing safe passage to people from Sudan so that they could move to Britain. Just the sort of one thing to note here. Yeah, please continue.
Right, and they say here the United Nations had described it as a war of atrocities, yet the brutalities of the Sudanese civil war were almost forgotten by the world until now. And because there was this operation of the RSF in El Fasher, the Rapid Support Forces, which is a paramilitary force, there have been new atrocities that are documented. I'm not going to show you the atrocities, but they have basically flooded the social media. They have flooded social media, and you see invariably people being massacred. Most of them are Christians, not all of them, because it's a ethno-religious conflict. It's an incredibly messy conflict. But you definitely see lots of, violent murderers killing them, filming themselves killing them, and shouting that their God is great.
To be fair, it's not particularly religious right now in Sudan. It was much more religious in the previous war between what is today Sudan and what is today South Sudan, where South Sudan was more both Christian and animist and all kinds of other things. And the Muslim side would sort of be completely butchering people. Now it's sort of less religious.
Doesn't it also have a huge religious dimension when they film themselves basically killing people and they proudly make the religious chants?
I don't know how to make this worse, but I will. The RSF, the force involved here, are the somewhat more secular force compared to the Sudanese military, who has been closer to the Islamists because of their background. So it's not that much of a religious thing, and it's not accurate to call the RSF particularly Islamist. They are being backed by the UAE against what they fear is Islamist influence.
Well, don't they also have those support from Islamist sides and other countries?
Everybody sees themselves as a jihadi in one way or another. Every Muslim warrior.
So if they see themselves as such, isn't it something to be... Why can't we just say it's a secular issue alone?
Because it's a little bit messier than that.
Okay.
It's a little bit messier than that.
Right, so there are tons of videos that have flooded, and they are all incredibly distressing, and you see really humanity at its worst. Yeah. You don't just see people suffering, you see people who make them suffer, and they proudly announce it throughout the whole world, and they do frequently make their religious chants, and I think that it is particularly disturbing. And this was a particular incident here where this has gone around the world. This is a mother begging for her children, and they are harassing her and terrorizing her and her children. And according to reports, the children were taken away and she was killed. And we do see a relative silence on the part of the international community against this. And I think, personally, I think that there is also a religious aspect into it. And I will add to what Firas was saying before. There have been also reports that the victims aren't just Christians, but I do think that there is a massive anti-Christian aspect into it, especially when all the people who are committing these atrocities are gloating and they are shouting that their God is great, and they're doing it for religious purposes. Right, so let us have this a few bullet points to understand what is happening in Sudan. This is from an article from the BBC that has been recently updated, but basically they're saying this because this is an ongoing thing, basically. There is massive instability in Sudan since 1956. I believe there have been around 20 coups.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's basically how you don't govern a country.
Decolonization just led to total instability, and actually we should have kept hold of it.
Kept hold of it, and it should have been governed from Egypt. If you were going to decolonize it should have been governed from Egypt. Because they are fundamental. I mean, I think that there are more bridges in parts of London than in the entirety of Sudan, a country that's sort of bisected by the Nile River, and the more inhabited areas have even more. And so if you're not able to build a bridge across a river, then you're not able to do very much. And the corollary is, please, can we not discuss bringing them to Europe? Please, can we if you're going to be humanitarian, go be humanitarian there.
The point is that there's a limit to how much help you can give when we're talking about a continent that is vastly overpopulated relative to Europe.
Yes.
And the point is that there are all these issues that we are talking about, and I believe that there are valid concerns, because one of the you can only help people when your house is in order.
Yes.
If your house replicates the problematic houses, then you can't help anyone.
No.
Right. So basically what happens in a nutshell is that they had 30 years of a president called Omar al-Bashir, and he governed Sudan from 1989 to 2019. And in 2019, he fell by a coup. And that coup was basically organized by two major groups. The one was the Sudanese military forces, commanded by the General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. And again, yes, I will give you that. This doesn't sound a particularly Christian name. Yes. The head of the armed forces and, in effect, the country's president. And then his deputy RSF leader, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemedti. And at some point, they diverged because the General Burhan and General Dagalo disagreed on the direction the country was going. And the main sticking points were the plans to incorporate the 100,000 strong RSF into the army, and that would lead then into a new force, and that's where they sort of
So just to add a bit of detail here, Omar al-Bashir was something of color revolution.
Yeah.
He was subjected to a color revolution of sorts, partly, and as always with these things, partly because the public was genuinely angry, and partly because there was foreign intervention to get rid of him, because he was too close to the Muslim Brotherhood and too close to Hezbollah and Iran. And so a coalition of countries worked together to sort of overthrow him and get rid of him. And they did so successfully. But one of the main men involved is this guy, Dagalo or Hamidti. And this guy had been responsible for a previous genocide in Darfur. And he's always been a genocidal maniac. He led a force called the Janjaweed, who went around just murdering people left and right, hundreds of thousands of people murdered, in partnership with the Sudanese military, in partnership with Bashir. And then he saw an opening and he turned on Bashir. And then him and his ally, who worked together, turned on each other over who becomes boss.
Yeah.
Burhan wanted to incorporate the RSF into the army. Hamidti wanted to keep his forces independent and subject to his own tribal control. And the war in Libya obviously helped enormously because it allowed Hamidti to become a lot richer, but through human smuggling and through gold smuggling, in partnership with sometimes the Russians and the Emiratis and others.
And they say that the UAE denies this, and also that he has the backing of General Haftar in Libya.
Yes.
Right. So I think we can sort of draw an idea of where this coalition comes from and what its goals are.
There hadn't been a color revolution, and if Gaddafi had been kept in place, a lot of this murderousness wouldn't be happening.
And here I'm going to mention the Open Doors organization, which I cannot recommend enough. Definitely visit their website. They were talking about the persecution of Christians around the world, and they have particularly strong points to make about Sudan and Nigeria, which we will talk about in a minute. And they're saying here basically that Sudan is one of the worst places to be a Christian. It scores 90 out of 100 in their prosecution level meter, and they're saying basically that there has been a spike in the abduction and killing of Christian men by radical Islamic groups, and that the civil war, although the civil war is on paper and in some respects, a conflict that isn't specifically Christian. Frequently, Christians are collateral damage. Mm-hmm. And many of these very violent groups are using the status, are using the, let's say, opportunities that they see themselves as having to commit atrocities against Christians.
The thing is, as well, to go back to your one of your original points about the protests that we've had across London in recent days, obviously, as we both know, there are, as you've chronicled, a lot with Realpolitik and like the Muslim Brotherhood, and these are, whether it's Israel and the Zionists, or whether it's the Islamists on the other side, these are people with a lot of money who are using it all around the world for their own purposes. I don't see this from the Christians.
No.
That where is the Christian lobbying groups? Where is the money? Where is the power to defend Christians around the world?
Yes.
And Open Doors also says here, why are Christians persecuted in Sudan? And they have 2 bullet points that I think are particularly indicative. They're saying in Sudan's ongoing conflict, both sides have seen the rise of Islamic extremists. Correct. They're capitalizing on the chaotic security situation to increase their attacks on churches and Christian communities seeking to destroy Christianity in Sudan. So even if someone can make the argument that the conflict on its own is not a particularly religious one, it seems that there are many Christians who are sort of being sandwiched between both sides, and they are...
One Iraqi bishop, when the Christians in Iraq were being attacked, made an excellent point, which is that Christians only know how to live in a law-abiding society where there is order, and where there is, and even if the order is brutal, where there is disorder, they don't thrive because they're constantly the victims of attack. And this is half the point, because the other half must be that Christians must impose order on the world, as they are commanded by God to do.
You look at, if I may, you look at like a piece of literature like Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and you just see how actually when European man descends into the heart of darkness, both metaphorically and geographically, goes into Africa, the cultural norms and means to enforce power of those societies is so rudimentary that what it ends up doing is basically working as a moral vacuum and just dragging like the more civilized races down into that gutter as well, because the African nations have no spirit of democracy, no allegiance to such ideals. It is might makes right.
Yes,
and so this is how they understand things.
And also the genocide of Christians in these countries doesn't have to be necessarily the first and the only goal of these of each side in these conflicts, but it's one of the collateral damages. And we have here from the Spectator of Australia an article that says, while every incident in Gaza is immediately placed at the top of world headlines, often repeated endlessly, even before full verification, Sudan's humanitarian catastrophe is relegated to the margins of international coverage.
Yes.
Many of the world's major media outlets, influenced by globalist institutions and left-leaning Western narratives, follow a selective approach in reporting human suffering. When a story aligns with Western regional politics, sympathy and attention surge, but when the victims are Africans, poor communities or non-Muslims, silence replaces images and headlines.
Correct.
And here we're going to talk about Nigeria and Trump's comments about it briefly. Again, from Open Doors, we have basically the claim that the persecution of Christians in Nigeria is basically the worst throughout the world. And they're saying, according to their research, more Christians are killed for their faith in Nigeria than in the rest of the world combined. Jihadist violence continues to escalate in Nigeria, and Christians are at particular risk from targeted attacks by Islamic militant groups, including Fulani militants, Boko Haram, and ISWAP, which stands for Islamic State West Africa Province. And they're saying these attacks are shockingly brutal in nature. Many believers are killed, particularly men, while women are often kidnapped and targeted for sexual violence. And I'm not going to I'm not going to describe the atrocities that I read during the last
May I
weekend.
interject briefly here?
Yes, of course.
There's a strategy there that's being pursued by Islamic State, and there's a Russia element and a United States element. The strategy is, for Islamic State, they're trying to work particularly on the Fulani, who are a tribe in that region that extends all over West Africa, and they're a minority tribe. Because they're a minority tribe, their tribal cohesion, even though they're huge, allows them to rule over the other disparate tribes in a very effective way. And so Islamic State has been working to recruit them and to incorporate them into its forces. And this would give them a full desert highway all over the Sahara Desert, meaning that they would gain freedom of movement between the Sahel region on the sort of southern part of West Africa all the way to Arab North Africa. And they'd be able to operate throughout that area. The Americans and their allies pretty much failed in dealing with this threat. So the Russians stepped in and helped Mali and Burkina Faso and a bunch of other countries and Niger to try to get them to stop the spread of this militancy from Nigeria to the rest of the region and from Libya to the rest of the region. And remember, the overthrow of Gaddafi very much enabled Islamic State to expand there. So they've worked hard to sort of create this network across the desert where they can pop up in any part of either Arab North Africa or Black West Africa and conduct their attacks and have pretty much freedom of movement from Mauritania to Sudan, all over. This is the agenda. Now Trump is trying to reinsert the Americans into this conversation by focusing on Nigeria and by focusing on the atrocities on Christians in Nigeria, which are a full genocide, unlike sort of in Sudan, it's a little more nuanced than that. But there is also a geopolitical element to it, which is to compete with the Russians and to reassert American influence on that region, because the French and the Americans under previous administrations had completely failed to control this.
And Trump here says basically Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. Thousands of Christians are being killed. Radical Islamists are responsible for the mass slaughter. I'm hereby making Nigeria a country of particular concern. And says, but that's the least of it. When Christians or any such group is slaughtered like is happening in Nigeria, something must be done. I'm asking Congressman Riley Moore, together with Chairman Tom Cole and the House Appropriations Committee, to immediately look into this matter and report back to me. It says basically the United States cannot stand by while such atrocities are happening in Nigeria and numerous other countries. We stand ready, willing and able to save our great Christian population around the world. And he signs. Yes, and I think it's a good way to end the segment by focusing on what Trump said. We will see what comes afterwards. But I want to say before, because maybe my point was a bit misunderstood. I fully accept that these conflicts are messier than the Christian side versus the non-Christian side. But what I think is a fair thing to say is that even if they are much messier than that, and you could say that both sides are in many respects anti-Christian, Christians get killed in the process as collateral damage, and these conflicts are sort of providing an extra opportunity in lots of these savages' minds to go and kill people. And they're not killing only Christians, but they seem to be doing it, and especially when they're doing it accompanying this with religious chants. I think it's a fair thing to say that
I agree.
There is a religious component into it.
Yes.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.